Recording. Okay. So, good morning, afternoon, good noon, everybody. Thank you for joining us at our lunchtime dialogue this Earth Action Week and the day after Earth Day. We're so happy that you're here to join us for a bit of a different style of dialogue today. We have a very special guest and one of our own employees here today to speak with us about home gardening and farming and all that goes into that. Before we get started, just a couple of really quick introductions and announcements. This is our Earth Action Week. If you've not already, please be sure to go to our website. We've got a different activity for each day, and we're calling on you, our network and our members to pledge to take action. And so today the pledge and the action that we're highlighting is growing food locally. So that's what the focus of today is. But we have 25 more activities that we're asking you to do. So if you can go ahead and go to the web page, and my colleague Angela is just putting that into the chat box right now, the link to that. That would be great. Another quick announcement is next week we have Arbor Day coming up. And so the Sustainable Claremont team, we're going to be planting 10 plus trees next week and next weekend. We're really excited for. We won't be having our normal Arbor Day event, but we do want to give you the opportunity to plant trees at your school or at your home or at your church. And we've got these little tree saplings here, little Sustainable Claremont tree saplings here that we'll be giving out to a number of our donors. For a $20 donation, we'll come deliver that to your house for you. So again, my colleague Angela is going to put the link to that in our chat box. As always, the best way to keep track of these dialogues and all the activities going on in Claremont and at our organization is to follow our activities through our newsletter. If you're not signed up to our newsletter, please be sure to do that. Simple and easy, and we try not to bombard you with too much stuff. We try to do only 1, 2, 3 emails a month. So again, Angela will put that into the chat box. Okay, so let me move forward here and introduce our amazing speaker today. So he is Romeo Lodia, and he's been at Sustainable Claremont for more than a year now. He's the site manager for our community compost program, and he also helped to create and run our raised bed garden program. So in the last 4 to 6 weeks, he's built, I think, 17 raised beds now, 3 in Laverne and 14 in Claremont. And it's a program that's growing, is really exciting, and we're looking to expand. I'm going to read from his bio here really quickly for you. Romeo says, "I've always been an outdoor man. I was a regular surfer for over a decade and an avid climber for almost as long. However, I've always kept my hands dirty in the garden longer than any of my recreational pursuits. I worked as a farmer at Amy's Farm in Ontario and Eco Farm in South Pomona. I also run a small market garden at my place that provides fresh weekly produce to both my family and my friends." And that's what we're here today to talk about, is to talk about that market garden that Romeo runs. And so with that long introduction, Romeo, thank you for joining us. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, you sound good.
Okay, sweet.
So so the structure of like today's talk is I'm gonna ask you a couple questions just to kind of lay some foundation and some context for the talk. And then any of the people on the call, you could either in the chat box, write your questions, or just raise your hand and we'll unmute you so you could ask Romeo any questions that you have about your garden or getting into this. But just, starting at the beginning, Romeo, I could see behind you that there's some foliage back there. Can you tell us where you are and what that setting is like?
Sure. So I'm in my backyard in Glendora. This is basically where I started gardening with my mom. She lives in Covina, and I don't remember when I started helping her, but I started gardening here in 2013, I believe. And I've basically grown food just, for myself and for my family. And from there, it just kind of grew into, taking over basically the whole backyard and recently the whole front yard.
So this is at your house, and do you have like any idea of like how much square footage you have that's devoted to this, or is it just the entire front and backyard? What's that look like?
It's sort of the entire front and backyard. I have a total of 27 raised beds, and that can range between 8-foot long to as long as 60-foot long. I would say most of them are standardized to about 25-foot long. So, and I really try to create like not just like a full-on like farm look, I guess, especially in my front yard. I wanted to look more like a garden, so it's appealing to neighbors that are walking by and stuff like that. So,
okay, great. And so with that's like a tremendous amount of like space, I think, devoted to growing food. How much does that yield, or how much can you grow for when you're growing at that level?
So right now, which is probably the peak growing season for Southern California, it's really spring, and I would say late fall or mid fall to early winter. Summer really is really hard to grow here because it's just so hot. And then, our winter, if we do have like a wet winter, then it's also hard because the oversaturation of water and stuff like that. But right now with my program, I am delivering to roughly 10 to 15 families, most of them weekly and some are bi-weekly. And also I donate a good amount of food to our local food pantry here called Shepherd's Pantry in Arrow Highway. And I also participate in the food access booth in South Pomona Farmers Market. So I also share some of my produce there. As far as like weight, I haven't really, calculated that, but so each week a person will get at least a minimum of 5 different items. And I sort of specialize in like greens. So a lot of salad, head lettuce, kale, and stuff like that. So 5 different items, but most of the time it's, I would say 7 to even like 10 items per week that I'm able to give to, participants, to my friends and family. So, yeah.
How do you choose the crops that you grow? Like, why do you specialize in greens? Is that because of demand or?
It's, so I started this venture, I got into gardening in 2013 because a friend of mine gave me a book by Wendell Berry, which really influenced me to be a cultivator. He has this thing about exploiter and cultivator. So, and with the setting here, because it's not like a traditional farm where I have acres and acres of land to cultivate. I sort of specialize in like short season crops. So that would be items that will go to full maturity within 45 days to as long as 90 days. So I'm sort of limited. So I don't grow like potatoes or sweet potatoes, anything like that. I grow a lot of like short season carrots, greens, and stuff that people are familiar with. I try to introduce new things, but I also know that it's really hard to break away from our habits. So I'll grow a lot of broccoli for the cold season. I'm not going to grow a lot of cabbages or like Romanesco or stuff like that.
Is there like a tension in there between like what's easy to grow or might be harvestable in a shorter amount of time and what's in demand?
Yes. So one thing I've noticed, I got into this like really hardcore maybe 2 years ago, and I follow a few people on social media. One of them is known as the urban gardener. His name is Curtis Stone. He's from somewhere in Canada. and he specializes in 5 crops, and that's all he grows. And I didn't really want to take that route. His sort of mission is a little different from mine. You know, he wanted to basically make it as profitable as possible. So he chose to sell to like local grocery stores and like local restaurants. So and those short season crops like salad mix and kale mix, I mean, they really grow in, you know, maybe 50 days, 60 days. So, you know, he's able to do that. But I wanted to sort of provide like a full balance, like selection to the people that, you know, get their produce from me. So, yeah. So, you know, if your main goal, I guess, is profitability, then I would say Curtis Stone's model is probably the route to take. I think, if I'm not mistaken, he cultivates, because I know he doesn't farm anymore, but he cultivates basically his own property and a neighbor's. And I think he grosses like 120 grand a year just for doing his backyard and front yard and someone else's backyard. So
wow, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Okay. And so you talked a bit about how you got started in this by reading Wendell Berry and doing it with your mom, but how did you like really make that first step? Like do you have formal training in this? Was it all self-taught? And like, how did you make the leap to transform like your yard and your front yard to like, you know, raise beds or
I would say it's mostly self-taught. You know, obviously I learned from my mom, but she mostly grew like ornamental stuff. She would grow herbs and stuff that she would use for her cooking. And obviously like tomatoes. I think everyone likes to grow their own tomatoes. So that's really how it started. And my goal was to, when I started my gardening back here, my goal was just to really see how much food I can grow for myself, which in the beginning, it wasn't a lot. And then eventually, you know, the more you do it, also the soil gets mature and it gets better. And that also helps with, you know, your bounty. So yeah, that's how it all started, really.
What do you mean the soil gets better?
So we have very sandy soil here in Glendora. So, you know, you buy like your normal traditional soil from like your hardware store, like Home Depot or Lowe's. That's how I started. I used those potting mix soils, and I just sort of blend it with the existing soil here. And initially it's, you know, you get a little bit of compaction, and also, sorry, that's a really loud bird sounds behind, but it just doesn't grow as much compared to, I have this old bed here that I started, which is the one that performs really, really well, because I think it's biologically active compared to how it was before. I mean, if I could show like pictures of that raised bed initially to what it is now, I mean, it's night and day. I mean, you know, I can probably, so I use that for specialty crops. So like I use like, I grow like a tricolored carrots and stuff like that. So stuff like that I like to grow in those really rich soil. Also my tomatoes, because they really likes a lot of nitrogen and stuff like that. I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, no, it does. So like, do you, at like this scale of gardening, do you have to think a lot about like crop rotation and like, you know, changing the beds that you use for the, you know, different produce throughout the year? Or is, if you add enough amendments, is that not something you need to think about too much?
So I basically add compost, which sometimes I get from the community compost program, but I also get it from local composters. And my favorite one is all the way in Vermont, which is probably not a very sustainable way to get compost, but they seem to be the ones that have the best right now in the nation. So I amend my beds maybe once a year. And I usually do it in the spring. And that's just to gear up for summer planting. But that's it. I don't use any like fertilizer or anything like that. I just strictly use compost. And as far as crop rotation, there's a rule of thumb where you grow 2 greens and then 1 root. So let's say, one of my beds, I'm growing salad right now. So once that's done, I can grow another type of greens, whether it's arugula or like spinach. And then after that, I'll do a root vegetable. And with my setting, I'm only limited to several root vegetables. So like short season turnips, a lot of carrots, beets and stuff like that. And then I go back to the greens after that. That's sort of like a good rule of thumb for crop rotation. Some people get really into it and, they'll do alliums and then brassicas and then all this stuff. But I don't really find any pest problems with the way I'm doing it. And I also kind of want a little bit of pest. I don't want an infestation, obviously, but a little bit is good because that's how you get all the birds and the beneficial insects here, because they're not gonna be here if there's nothing for them to eat. So
right. And Angela had a good question that she just typed in. She said, what did you do to your initial raised bed to make it more biologically active? Is it just since it's been there the longest, or was it different type of compost? What?
I think it's been there the longest. I do a process called minimal tillage. So there's all this talk of like no-till farming. I don't really think that exists because anytime you rake, like your soil, I mean, you're technically, disturbing it. So it's, unless you're just adding compost on top of it without disturbing it, I think that would be like your strict no-till farming. But I would say most of the people that do what I do, I mean, we're not inverting the soil. We're trying to keep a lot of the root structures in there, but I mean, there's really no way that you cannot disturb the soil. So I do a thing called minimal tillage, and I think that helps with the soil quality. And also just putting good compost. And, eventually, I think it's also with time, then, you start seeing a lot more earthworms and stuff like that. So, yeah.
Do you compost at your house, or do you just source it elsewhere?
I do, but I don't have a lot of space left.
Right.
But I do compost all my kitchen scraps and whatever I have here from the garden. And I try to experiment with not just with my composting, but also with my gardening. So I like to do a lot of like interplanting and relay cropping, where I would have as much as like 4 different items in one bed. I'm not sure if it's successful or not, but I like to sort of try out a lot of things. And then I pick what kind of works with my situation.
Have you found anything that's kind of surprised you when doing that? That might not be something you've read in a book, or like, that you've heard from somebody else, but you just kind of discovered through this process?
Well, a lot of people talk about companion planting, but they don't really practice it in like, bigger farms. So I worked at Amy's farm before, and I helped start a community farm in South Pomona. And, we don't really do interplanting or companion planting in those places, but that's something that I found that's really helpful and useful here. Not only you get 2 different crops in one bed, but I think it helps with pest prevention, or at least it minimizes it. And I think it kind of grows symbiotically. I have this book called, maybe I can just show it. It's this one. that has a lot of information about companion planting, and that's sort of like my go-to. And it's supposed to be beneficial for both plants. So one will deter the other's pests, and the other will attract like beneficial insects and stuff like that. So yeah.
And it's just, I think the title of the book had organic in it. I don't think we've touched on, do you do all organic farming?
Yeah, so I do. I think the technical term that a lot of people in my field use is chemical free. So there are a lot of organic farmers that still spray organic pesticides, you know, and I mean, if that works for them, that's, you know, good on them. I try not to. I think in the beginning I did use, I think it's neem oil, but I figure, and that was mainly for aphids. But I think having like healthy soil really prevents that. And also being mindful of when you plant things, and using like physical barriers. Like I have this insect netting or insect cloth fabric that I use. And that basically, I cover like early transplants with that. And then I'll eventually remove it once I think they're like sort of like in their teenage stage.
Right.
And then they're pretty much good, because they're really only susceptible in their initial, you know, transplant. So.
Okay. And Romeo, would you mind holding that book up again? So I can grab the author of it.
Sorry, it's
the Gardener's, maybe back a teeny tiny bit. The Gardener's A to Z Guide to Growing Organic Food. And it's Tanya L.K. something something.
Yeah.
Tanya. What's the last name?
Denkla.
Okay. I just put it in the chat box there, but maybe we could pull up a link to that in like Pal's books or something, and drop it in the chat box. Okay, great. And then a couple of questions here from the members. You've been talking about companion plants. Can you give us some examples of when you say companion plants, what you're getting at?
Yeah. So I don't know if I can show it, but I have a row of broccoli plants here. And the broccoli that I grow is really different from the broccoli you get from the store. I grow something where it's called a cut and come again. So I don't just get one cut, like the ones you see from the store. They get basically one big crown of broccoli, and that's it. And to me, I can't really afford something like that, because a broccoli will take about 90 days for full maturity where you can harvest it. So I try to look for varieties where I can get multiple cuts or multiple heads. They might be smaller, and I just bunch them up, and plus it looks prettier. But the broccolis here have shallots interplanted between the broccoli rows. I also have broccolis that are interplanted with spinach, and then some salad greens interplanted with radish. So there's a lot of that stuff going on. I have some rainbow chard here with arugula in between the rows. Although I would say that wasn't probably a good call, because the leaves of the chards are so big that it blocks the sun for the arugula, so it doesn't really grow properly. So there's a lot of trial and error.
So like enemy plants instead of companion plants. So certain things you probably don't want to plant next to each other in the same raised bed. Okay. Yeah. And then another quick question here from Dick is, why raised beds? So I get this question a lot too, as we launch this raised bed garden program. Like, why not just planting veggies in the ground and maybe adding some soil amendment? What are like some of the advantages to doing raised bed gardens?
You can definitely do that, but our soil here is so poor as far as quality. So you can choose to amend the existing soil, but I think having it in like a raised setup, I think it gives it a lot more growing room. Like as far as the soil, like, if you have like half a foot or even a foot of good soil, then your plants are really going to do good. And I think once that root structure hits that foot long or even starts going down deeper, it'll be okay, even though the soil is more depleted down there. And also, I think it looks better than just planting it like like same level as your existing ground. So
okay. And I got a question here from Carrie about pests. So this is another question that always comes up, especially from people who we might have just built the raised beds for, is concern about pests eating all of their veggies, all of their harvest. So what do you do about that? Are there certain like watch outs? What do we need to know?
So I would say prevention is the key. So when I mentioned having the insect netting or the insect covering, that really helps. But if you don't have that, I would say a lot of people that are doing it as a hobby probably are not going to invest in something like that. Checking your plants daily, and if you see, I would say the most common pest that we get here is aphids. Really, that's the only pest that I've ever seen here. And what I do is I basically just have a sponge, and I'll have soap. I use Dr. Bronner soap, and I basically wipe it manually. Some people spray it, but I think it just sprays it to the next plant. So I just manually wipe them down, and usually a couple of wipes, let's say today and then maybe Sunday, it basically takes care of it. You just have to really spend just more time and like really checking them, I would say, will control your pest issues.
Do you have any problems with like skunks or raccoons or opossums or anything like that, or squirrels? Is that an issue that you run into with the amount of stuff that you're growing?
Yeah. So initially when I started growing, I mean, there was nothing like everything was growing right. There's no disturbance. There's no, there might be like aphids here and there, but there's one year that I started seeing like my beds being disturbed, like a whole lettuce head would be just inverted, but it's not like it wasn't eaten or anything like that. So I thought it would be just like a cat or something like that. And then eventually a farmer that works at Amy's farm told me, "Oh, you have a skunk problem. They basically like to dig up really rich soil, and then they eat all the earthworms." So I started covering my plants, but the skunks learned to lift or rip the covering. And then eventually I decided to invest in a small garden electric fence. And that's just enough to give them a little shock when they put their wet nose close to the fence, and it deters them. And I would say that was, that's the problem that I had here.
Do you surround your entire garden with that, or just certain types of crops?
Basically, my whole backyard is surrounded with electric fence. The front, they're not really interested there because I think it's exposed. I don't have any fencing there. So there's a lot of feral cats and they're just roaming around here. So I think that basically deters them from staying there and digging and stuff like that. But in my backyard, especially after rain, when all the earthworms and all these little grubs are out, I mean, they just go to town on my beds.
Okay. All right. Hey, and I just want to encourage anybody who's who's watching this right now, please feel free to ask questions or raise your hand or put in any questions into the comment box. I don't want to steal all the questions here. I'm trying to get to them all in the comment box. So if I miss anything, please let me know. This is all super helpful information, Romeo. I know that for us, one of the big challenges was just like getting started. And so it was super helpful to just have somebody come put in a raised bed for us. What's like a good starting point for somebody who wants to get into this? Is there like something easy that if you're just want to get into it like with you and your kids, or like, I don't know, whatever, like a easy on-ramp for this type of gardening?
Yeah. So, once you install your raised bed, I would say start with plants that you like, that you want to eat all the time. Obviously, you're not going to grow tomatoes during winter, although you can. I mean, it's not like we have like a hard winter here. I mean, I still have tomatoes from last summer that I grow specifically just for me and a few of my friends. But yeah, I would say start with stuff that you like to eat. I wouldn't go and, grow a bunch of turnips if you're not really into turnips, right? So, grow a lot of leafy greens. Seems like they do really well here, besides during summer. And carrots, because everyone likes carrots. So, and you just got to do it. I mean, you can pay attention to the, when you buy a seed package. Here, let me grab one here. So it usually comes like this, and it'll say, sow every 16 feet or something like that. You don't necessarily have to follow something like that. You basically, so a carrot, right? So imagine a carrot seed. It's very tiny. When you drop it, you don't necessarily have to be there with a ruler and say, okay, that's an inch away from the last seed. You kind of have to imagine like how big that carrot will be. And that's basically enough distance from them. Like a lot of them will give you like depth planting recommendations, like a 1/4 inch. I mean, you're not going to go there with a ruler and make sure everything is a 1/4 inch deep. I would say, a good rule of thumb is like your first line on your index finger. That seems to work for me. Obviously, there are other seeds that are like corn that you have to. I would say the bigger the seed is, the deeper you should put them. And then I would probably say an inch would be the deepest that I've put a seed here, like direct sowing. But I know like there's this farming called dry farming in Native American or indigenous people here in the Southwest, where they plant their squash and corn and bean seeds over a foot deep. And that's deep compared to what we do here. So, but I would say the recommendations on seed package, it's good to know, but it doesn't you don't necessarily have to follow them. It becomes sort of intuitive once you start growing your own stuff, and then you see like, oh, well, this one grew to full maturity and I have all this, I have like half a foot left. And then there's the next crop, then maybe next time, then you should put it a little closer. So,
right. Great.
Also a good thing to see here where it says 45 days until maturity. I don't know if everyone can see that.
Yeah.
So that's maturity, not from seed. So from seed, there's a germination time. So for carrots, usually it takes about 2 weeks, even to 3 weeks during when it's, winter, when there's not a lot of sun. And that's just for them to germinate. And then on top of that, it needs to grow to a seedling stage. And that takes about maybe another, 2-3 weeks. And then from there, then it'll grow to full maturity, in like 60 days. And that's when they're talking about. That 60 days is from seedling to maturity, not from the seed to maturity. So it's kind of misleading, because when you see something like that, oh, you can think like, oh, in 45 days, I'm going to have all this carrots. Well, not really.
Yeah, you just dramatically extended my time frame for my carrots. All right, I'm gonna break in with another question here from Richard really quick. You talked about like the Vermont compost being so good and how you use some of the soil from the community compost site. Can you describe like how you know that, like an experiment maybe that you've done like on different beds to see like, you know, which ones perform better? Like how do you kind of keep an eye on those types of things?
Yeah. So as I said, I like to experiment here a lot. So I basically took a good amount of compost from the community composting program at the friend site in Claremont. And then I bought your traditional compost bag from, I think it was from the local nursery here called Glendora Gardens. And I basically had a side-by-side in one bed. I filled half of it with the store-bought compost and the other half with the community compost that we make. And I basically try to make sure they get identical sun, watering pattern, everything. Same seed, so seeds that came from the same package and stuff like that. And then I documented their progress. And we do have that picture, but I don't have it handy with me. But the germination rate and the success rate compared to a store-bought compost, I mean, ours is, I mean, you can really notice it, you know, just the germination rate. You see them germinate faster and taller compared to the store-bought stuff. And then also they're obviously, since they're growing faster, then, you know, you can harvest them sooner. So, yeah.
Great. And then in addition to the soil, we have a question from Elise about watering. Like, what's your watering routine? Do you have like a drip system? Do you do it daily? Do you do it by hand? How does that work?
So I have a drip system, and drip is really good once your plants are established. But when you want them to germinate, you want overhead watering. So, you know, as I said, like carrots will take about 2 weeks to germinate. So you want to keep that, you know, top layer of soil moist until they germinate. And then after that, once they are in their seedling stage, then you can pretty much rely on drip irrigation. And during summer, when it's, you know, mid 80s to mid 90s, I will probably have my drip irrigation set up for like every 2 days. And that's an hour each. But when it's really hot, I do an extra overhead irrigation. And that's just me having a really fine mist in the middle of the day. And I know that's another thing that a lot of gardeners will say, like, oh, don't wet the leaves because they'll burn and stuff like that. If you are watering them with like really big, like if it's not a mist, then yeah, I would say don't do that. But if it's just misting, I think it's actually really good for the plants because it cools them down. So I do an extra misting when it's really hot. Let's say it's like 98 or 100. And I'll do that in the middle of the day, you know, when it's the hottest. And basically that kind of just helps them cool down. And then I do a really deep irrigation, usually at night, because it gives it a longer period to percolate down rather than early in the morning, because here it gets really hot by like 9 o'clock. So, yeah.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. And then another question, just about the amount of space that you have. How much time do you spend in the garden every day? Like, what's the maintenance schedule for something like this?
So in the beginning, obviously, it took more time, like building it and stuff like that, dealing with pests or whatever. But once they're established, I mean, since I am providing to, you know, a lot of, you know, a dozen people, a dozen families, then I do spend a lot of time tending the garden. So I would say each day, at least 6 hours. And that's also because, you know, I don't use any pesticides and stuff like that. So I really have to be diligent. And, you know, like I will look at one row of bed and see like a kale bed, you know, I'll have, you know, 90 plants of kale in that bed. And I'll look for, you know, let's say every third of that bed, I'll look at the plants and then really inspect them. And then, you know, if there's pest pressure, and then I'll I'll do the wipe method, and if not, then I'll go on to the next bed. I also I don't really do a lot of weeding, to be honest with you. So the way I did my beds is called the Lasagna Method, where if you have an existing lawn, then you basically kill it with cardboard. So you pile on, maybe a couple of pieces of cardboard, and then you really wet it, and then you put your compost or soil on top. And the cardboard basically blocks the sun. So it basically kills that patch of lawn. And that's what I did here, but I basically, before this was a garden, it was more like a native landscape. So I grew a lot of native plants, and which I still do. And that's also one thing that I use for interplanting. But yeah, so I basically use the Lasagna method to transform the whole property, and I don't really have a lot of weed pressure. So.
Great. And then a question from Angela about the seeds. I'm just going to add to it too. First, is there like a place you like to source your seeds from? And then when you do get them, do you always sow them directly in the raised bed, outdoors, or do you a protected area inside? Like, what's that process?
Sure. I don't buy any seeds from even the local nurseries here. I think the seeds that are sold here are very poor quality. There are 3 seed companies that I purchase seeds from. One is Baker Creek. They do have a California location in Petaluma, so that's up north. So they specialize in heirloom varieties. So that's all they sell is all heirloom. So there's nothing that's been hybridized. So if you want to start seed saving, then I would say that's the best place to go, because basically an heirloom, you can save their seeds and then you don't never have to, buy seeds again. But with my operation, I get a lot of my seeds from High Mowing, which is also based in Vermont. So they really specialize in small farmers like myself. So they do have heirloom open pollinated seeds, but they also have a lot of varieties that are hybridized, which most of them are more resistant to pests or diseases. And yeah, so I use High Mowing and Baker Creek basically. And I use a little bit of Johnny's, but I think their seeds are a little pricey sometimes. And I think the qualities, High Mowing seeds quality is just as good as Johnny's. So, but yeah, there's technically no California-based seed company that I know of, because Baker Creek started in the South, if I'm not mistaken, and then High Mowing and Johnny's, they're all based in the Northeast, in Vermont and Maine. So, yeah.
And what about once you get the seeds, do you sell them directly in the?
Oh, that's right. So it depends. So your seed packets will come with a little instruction. Let me get one here. All right. I don't know if people can see this. There's a lot. This is a seed from Johnny's.
Okay.
And this is a lettuce. So it's a lettuce head. And it's going to tell you right where my finger is, the direct seed instructions and transplant. And usually if a plant is better as a transplant, they would say recommended. There are certain seeds that you just never transplant, like carrots. It has to be direct seeded. So like lettuce heads are great for transplant because you're basically growing 2 items for that bed. You can utilize that bed for something else while this one matures. And you plant these in a tray that looks like this. These are called 10-20 trays. So it's 20 inches long and then 10 inches width. And basically you drop 1 seed in each of these after you put your compost or your potting medium. And then you just drop a seed and then you cover them. And then basically you can keep this inside your house or if you have a greenhouse. And it doesn't need sun. So for it to germinate, a lot of seeds actually don't need sun to germinate. They actually prefer dark. So I would just leave that somewhere where it's cool or the temperature doesn't fluctuate a lot. Because for a lot of stuff to germinate, they don't want like extreme temperature. Most of them prefer, 65 to 75 degrees. And that's sort of like the optimal range that you want. Anything above that, especially during summer, like my girlfriend makes fun of me because I care more about my start trays. Like I'll literally put them in a cooler and with ice or with like those ice pack, and I'll leave them there for, until they germinate. I mean, obviously I change the ice pack, but because it's so hot that it needs to be that 65-degree range. So I have a lot of coolers in my garage, and then I just leave them in there. And once they germinate, then you can take them out, and that's when they actually need sun, and just keep them cool and water them all the time. So yeah.
Just out of curiosity, how many of those do you have going at like any given time to replenish your supply?
So because of the space that I have, I would say like those seed trays, I would have maybe like anywhere between 6 to 15 trays like that. In the summer, I do a lot of my lettuce starts like this. So I would basically sow this. There's 128 holes here. So I would sow one flat, that's a flat, every week. Just so I would have salad, because everyone likes salad in the summer. So I would sow one a week, and that's enough to get me through our really hot summer season. Yeah, so anywhere between 6 to 12. I have some tomatoes and peppers right now that I'm hardening off. So that's basically after you have them inside your house or in your greenhouse, then you have to leave them out for a couple of weeks, just so they get acclimated to the weather and the wind, and if you have any pests. Because if you plant them right away, from indoors to outdoors, I mean, you basically cut their chances in half, so because you baby them for, all these time, and then you're just going to throw them out there in the elements, and they're not going to do really good. So
Right. Yeah, actually, Elise has a question about that, about when do you plant your summer / heat loving plants? Like how early or late in the season can you continue to do that before it's...
So it really depends. So if I was doing a farmer's market setting, or if I was catering to like restaurants, a lot of those folks that are doing the same stuff, they've planted their peppers, their zucchinis already. I don't, because I noticed that most of the people that are subscribed to my little program really prefer like fall, winter crops, except for tomatoes. Obviously, everyone likes tomatoes. But so I try to extend my fall crops and my winter crops, and then I plant my summer crops because they grow so fast during the summer. Like a zucchini plant will germinate from one of these trays in 7 days, maybe even less. And then from a seedling to harvest, probably 30 days, and you get your first fruit. So I'm not in a rush to plant the summer stuff. I mean, I've obviously have stuff that are planted already, some tomatoes, and the zucchini I don't really plant early because they just grow profusely. So I sometimes I just have so much of them, and it doesn't really, people aren't really excited about them as much. So yeah, so I don't really, a lot of people I would say are more interested in like cruciferous vegetables like broccolis and cauliflower. They seem to get excited more about that, or like really sweet carrots. So that's one thing that I plant year round, like carrots and kale. And, obviously it takes more care for carrots during summer, like they're in shade cloth and stuff like that. But as far as summer crop, I've already basically planted my summer crops in these flats. and then they're just waiting to be transplanted, or some of them have been transplanted already. And I'm already actually thinking of super late summer, early fall stuff. And that's what I'm already planting on my flats. So I'm planting broccolis already and cauliflowers already. So yeah.
Great.
So I started thinking of my summer stuff, I would say in January.
Wow.
And I start sowing them in February. And, you know, I have some tomato plants that are on the ground already, but I always have a second flat of tomatoes because just right, you know, like yesterday we had a little bit of rain. And as a seedling, tomatoes are really prone to diseases. So I'm banking on half of that 72 tomatoes that I planted. I would say half of them will probably not make it because of that rain.
And Romeo, just really quick, I think Richard has the picture that we're going to show on the screen in just a second. But before we do that, since this is related, we've been talking about like seeds and seedlings. I think for most people, like the first instinct is just to like run to Lowe's or Armstrong or Home Depot and grab like, you know, a couple, you know, 8-packs or whatever they are of plants. Is there a reason we shouldn't do that other than like it's cost prohibitive for like somebody who does it at scale like you, or is there
no, I think
cons?
If people buy their seeds from places like that, I mean, I would say, I don't know if you'll be successful. I mean, I'm sure you'll have some success, but I think you might just get discouraged because you might not, you know, get the bounty harvest that you are wanting, right? And then most of these places like Baker Creek, they ship for free anyways, and usually takes about a few days, and then you get them, you know, your doorstep. So, and it's the same price, to be honest with you. I think a packet of arugula at Home Depot is probably about like $4, $5. Same price at Baker Creek or Johnny's or High Mowing. So,
okay, sounds good. And then Richard, do you want to show us that experiment? Let's see, I think we're just going to share a screen in just a second here. It's pretty amazing. Richard, you're muted. I don't know if you wanted to say anything, but.
Yeah, so the left side of your screen, that's basically the compost that we make at the community compost program. And then the one to your right is, I forgot the brand of that compost, but as you can tell the difference, I mean, you can barely see, you know, the carrots on the right side.
It's probably best not to mention the brand that you use on the right.
Yeah, we won't mention it, but you can buy it from any store.
Well, it is. I mean, it's important though. I think, you know, we started our raised bed program, and when we started like pricing everything out, like it was clear that the most expensive part was good soil. Like decent soil is really expensive. And like, I think that's probably one of the places where a lot of people cut corners, or, you know, just don't have like the extra cash to spend on better soil. But it matters, right? And if you're not successful in growing because you didn't get the quality of soil, it might deter you, and you might not be, you know, willing to continue with gardening at home or whatever. And so I think this is like a good illustration of that difference. Yeah. Very cool. We're about to wrap up here, Romeo. I've got like 1 or 2 more questions. Let me make sure I got to everybody's. Okay, yeah, I think we've gone through all the questions in the comment.
I have one question.
Oh, good.
I know I've had a lot. Thanks, Romeo. In that photo that you just showed, is that straight compost to compost, or what kind of mix of compost to regular soil?
It's basically, so I have my base soil, and then I basically use, you know, the Sustainable Claremont compost and a compost bag from, you know, X company. That's it.
Okay, but what's the ratio of your base soil to compost? Like 1-to-1, or?
So as I said, so
put it on top.
I just put the compost on top.
I see.
So, and that's really the key thing, because that's the first connection that your seeds will have, is that compost, not the existing soil. So if your compost is really poor quality, you know, as you can tell on the picture, it's really going to have a hard time germinating.
Just to nail down on that a little bit more, Romeo, like, so if we're talking like about just putting compost on the top, do you need like a layer of like 2 or 3 inches, or do you need like, you know, a substantial bit more, or like what's the?
I would say 1 inch is good
Okay.
for everyone's, you know, for gardening. But for me, I usually put about 2 inches. But I also amend my soil only once a year. Some market farmers will amend it every time they plant something new, which I don't, because it's just time consuming for my operation, because most people will plant only one crop in that bed, as I mentioned earlier, where with me, I'm planting multiple crops. So if I remove the broccoli, I still have one crop there at least. So it's not like I can dump compost on top of that. So I'll basically wait per season for me, and really, you know, spring is when I amend my soil. So that's when I add my compost. So
That's helpful. I think that's really helpful to know that. Okay, my last question for Romeo, or 2 questions to wrap everything up. What is, for what you do, like this scale of market farming, gardening, what's the worst thing about it, and what's the best thing about it?
ooh, I would say the best thing about it is the satisfaction of seeing these things grow. I mean, it's sometimes, you know, I look at it and it's like, man, I can't believe I grew all this, you know, especially when I have a big harvest, when I have crates and crates of like broccoli and cauliflower, or, you know, sometimes I'll have, I don't know, you know, maybe like 30 pounds of tomatoes or something like that, you know, and it's like, man, like it's pretty cool that I can do that. Also, I would say a lot of the people that are in my program, either they are starting to eat healthier, so trying to lose weight and stuff like that. And it's really nice when they really appreciate you. I have, as I said, about 15 people in my program, and I would say, you know, eight of them have been with me since I started. And, you know, every time I see them, they're excited and they're very appreciative, and they tell me their stories of, you know, now they're eating healthier, and, you know, everyone else in their household is, you know, loving the fresh produce and stuff. So I would say that's the best part. The bad part, I would say, is our summer season. It's just really hot. I mean, it's really draining. I know a lot of farmers that actually complete opposite of the East Coast, where they take a break during winter there. Here, they take a break during summer, and they're able to basically, you know, stretch their money from the 8th-month growing season, from you know, fall to spring, and then they'll skip the summer because it's just, sometimes it's unbearable. So yeah.
All right, always good to end on a low note.
Stuart, how about, I just can't help myself, but how about this testimonial? So Romeo gave me, you know, from time to time, he gives me some of his leftover stuff that he hasn't delivered successfully. And I take it home and I bite into it, you know, turnips, carrots, whatever it is. And it's like, you know, gong, you know, the flavor just explodes in your mouth, and it's so different than even good vegetables that you get, you know, in a Bonds or something or other. You know, it's not like they're bad, but there's just no comparison with the freshly picked vegetables from Romeo's garden.
Yeah, I could attest to that. My sister's a paying customer of Romeo's, and I take half of her delivery.
So last night I was in my kitchen alone, and I ate like 80 snap peas, and I kept dipping them in blue cheese. And I was just like looking around. I felt like I was doing something bad because I ate so many of them. Like 80. I'm sure there was 80 of them. I ate them all. They're delicious.
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah, on that note, so just a big thank you, Romeo, again for doing this talk today and for being just such a valuable part of the Sustainable Claremont team. And if anybody's interested in putting a raised bed garden in, or more kind of like one-on-one workshops or coaching, we're really looking to kind of expand this gardening program here at Sustainable Claremont, and kind of exploding the types of services that we offer. So if you need help, like one-on-one help with your garden, you need new raised beds, you need compost, let us know, and let your friends and family know. And so everybody, thank you again for coming, and that's a wrap. Thank you, Romeo.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.